All right, everybody, if we can, we'll start our announcement here. Hate to break up the party. Hey, good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. As Mitch mentioned, my name is Joey Payro. This is Mr. Troy Perry, and we do have an announcement today about a new ministry that will be starting here at Redeemer. And before we get into it, just a little bit of background. Over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we've all seen stories on TV of horrific events that have happened throughout our country. And after each of those, somebody would walk up to one of us, myself or someone else, and say, hey, what are we doing at Redeemer? Not being alarmist, but what are we doing at Redeemer to keep our church, our kids safe? And after each of those, we'll come back as a group usually, and hey, what do we need to do? And around the table, we start spitfiring ideas, and it sounds great, and then like all of us, a lot of times, it kind of wears off and we move on to something else. And then another event happens. And so after this latest tragedy at Uvalde, I had a parent come up and say, hey, what are we doing at Redeemer to make sure our kids, our church congregation safe? And so at the next elder meeting, we brought it up and we got to talking, and providentially, Mitch said, hey, you know what? I just had a Christ Together meeting, and we met this gentleman named Troy Perry, and why don't we talk to Troy? And so Troy and I, over the last probably 2 or 3 months now, have been in conversation about what we can do here at Redeemer to do our best to keep our church congregation, our kiddos, our Spanish ministry as safe as we possibly can. And so Troy and I are here this morning to announce a new emergency response team here at Redeemer. And so before everybody gets really nervous about what that could or couldn't look like, I want to get Troy involved here. So Troy, if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about your ministry, Guard the Flock.
Yeah, so thank you all again. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to work with Joey and the elders and Mitch over the past several months. Guard the Flock was really born out of 2 careers I've had. So I'm a former Harris County Deputy Sheriff. So I have about 17 years active police experience. I hold a Master Peace Officer certification in the state of Texas. I'm also a licensed police instructor. Really had a passion for not only going to training, but training others in law enforcement. And then the second part of that career is after I left law enforcement, I went into the corporate world as a leadership development trainer and had a good career in the corporate world as well. But after a layoff in 2019, I've always had the desire to be in the ministry. And similar to your worship pastor, I don't know that evangelism is my gift. But I do think Paul maybe did leave one of the gifts off his list of spiritual gifts. I have the gift of gab. And so I like to stand up and talk to people. That's the reason why I'm a trainer. And so I thought, you know what, how can I marry those 2 careers, law enforcement and training, and start something that is obviously needed? So we saw some of these tragic events that Joey had talked about on the news over this past several years leading up to that. I said, you know what, I think I can do something to help churches prepare for the unthinkable, but also some of the more common things that you can experience in a congregation that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. So I'm married. I have 3 kids. One of them is out of the house. Hallelujah. Almost 28 years old. I do have a 16 or almost 16-year-old at the end of the month. And a 6-year-old at home. And we live quite a ways away. We still go to Kingsland Baptist Church here in Katy. I am the emergency response team director there, but we live outside of Brenham, up where they make Bluebell ice cream. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, great. And we all love Bluebell, so that's awesome.
So do we.
And one of the things that's been so great is Troy is, local, being here at Kingsland, so we've got some good connections there with Troy. Troy, let me just... why is it important, we have these conversations and like we mentioned that kind of cycle of, oh man, what do we need to do? And then we kind of move on. Why is it important for a church like Redeemer, like Kingsland, like others to have a team like this in place?
Yeah, and so it all goes to preparation, right? It's one of those things that you don't need a team until you need a team. And then it's too late, right? No matter what the event is, and again, we'll talk about a gamut of things. We're not only talking about these really horrific, terrible things that happen, but think about some of the more minor things that can happen as well. But it's too late. It's not enough. We know that it's not enough just to have, say, we have firefighters in the audience that maybe have medical training, or we have doctors in the audience, or police officers in the audience. or even people who have license to carry weapons in the audience. It's not enough just to say we have them here, because in times of crisis, the chaos that ensues in those times of crisis are not conducive to an adequate response. And we've seen that time and time again in some of these situations. And so there's lots of data that we can pull from some of these events that have happened in the past that say that preparation is really the key, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so what we prepare for things that we hope never happen, but better to be prepared, have people in place that are ready to respond in the unlikely event that they do.
Yeah, and I think what Troy, and one of the things I really appreciate about Troy and the relationship we've had and the conversation we've had is that we do see these events on TV and we go, oh my gosh. And that's what drives a lot of this conversation. But Troy, talk a bit about what are the odds, and then also what are the things that we're really preparing for. So I get nervous because I think that this tactical response, and I don't want anybody out there like, oh my gosh. But the things that we're preparing for aren't really always what.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let me just tell you the truth about some statistics. Because if you get out there and you Google some stuff, you're liable to find some things that would terrify you. And I will tell you that some of the things you'll find out there are overinflated. Here's the truth. There are approximately 380,000 churches in the United States. In the past 23 years, there have been 26 church shootings, right? That is a tiny fraction, not to minimize the terribleness of those situations, but that is a tiny, tiny fraction of the churches that have been involved over a 23-year period. However, the things that you're more likely to encounter are things like heart attacks, diabetic emergencies. So I've been doing this for a while now, and I've been a Christian for the majority of my life. I have never responded to an active event at a church, thank the Lord. But what I have dealt with is I have dealt with a heart attack. I have dealt with countless diabetic emergencies. I've had seizures. I've had dislocated shoulders, which, by the way, that's a really good story for the high schoolers about why you shouldn't skip church and Sunday school and practice your skateboard maneuvers out in the parking lot. So I could give you a really good story on that one. But those are the kinds of things that, by and large, we deal with on a regular basis. And again, it's not enough to say, well, we have a doctor, we have a firefighter that may be trained in those emergency techniques in the audience, because the time that it takes to come in, number one, just to make sure or know that that person happens to be in attendance that day and not on vacation or something, but then to come in the auditorium, find them, and get them to the scene of whatever that may be, a cardiac arrest, a heart attack, a stroke, something like that, is time-consuming, and those minutes that it takes to do that could be the difference between life and death in those situations. So having a team that's prepared to address a gamut of potential situations is really, really important. And again, it's too late once you need them to try to fight it. So having them in place ahead of time.
Awesome. And I think what Troy said is so good. I mean, we're so lucky. We do have people here who are trained medically. Mm-hmm. And so much of this is more about coordinating what we already have. Mm-hmm. And Troy, as we talk about implementing this team and having a team together, what does that look like maybe on a Sunday morning here at Redeemer? I don't know if you guys have known, but Troy's been here a few times and just kind of hung around the campus from 8:30 to afterwards, just kind of see the flow of what happens mm-hmm. here at Redeemer. And so talk to us a little bit about visibly what we may or may not even notice about having a team like this in place.
Yeah, so in my opinion, what Guard the Flock really focuses on is training a team that is prepared for addressing the safety, security, and welfare of the congregation. So safety is a really big gamut of things. That could be observing a coffee spill on the floor and preventing a trip or a slip, right? So making sure that you're observing that, looking for environmental things that could be hazardous to somebody, trip and falls, those kinds of things. So having a team that's trained to be observant and just look for those things. Security is obvious, right? That is being prepared for the big things in case they happen. Again, the statistics of that are far beyond the possibility, but there is always a possibility. And then the welfare deals with the medical side of things, making sure people are have the proper medical training, can be responded to in the event they have that. So the things you'll notice, I think there are really two things. Number one, an emergency response team is a visible deterrent to an active attacker. And we have a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry in the United States called security, right? There's a reason why we have security guards at a lot of different places. Now, we're not saying that we're going to have the commandos out there, right? So we're not suggesting that you're going to have people with camouflage with Uzis strapped to them. We're not going to have people on the roof with bazookas or anything like that. We're not talking about that. That's way beyond what we need. But there should be a visible identification, whatever that looks like. T-shirts all the same color that say safety on the back of them, something like that. So there'll probably be something that you'll notice that the people will be recognizable, right? And you want to know that so that if you do have a medical emergency, you know who to run and get. There'll be a visibly identifiable team. And then some of the things that we've talked about are just thinking about the way traffic flows through the organization. For example, I know we've talked a lot about the children's hallway down here. There's some signs that have been posted on the doors that we've recommended. And that's just to keep people from flowing through there unnecessarily. We do things sometimes just to mitigate some of the potential risks. Even though, they're minute, we want to do things to mitigate some of those kinds of things. So by and large, you won't see a lot of major changes. You might see some flow changes where we've recommended that people flow through a certain area to prevent people that don't really need to be in an area from being there. And you'll see a little bit more of a visibility that will not only help a potential attacker identify that they want to go somewhere else because they don't want to be where somebody is there and prepared for them, right? They're going to go somewhere else. But also so that people can identify who to go to if they have a concern or if they need help.
And that's great. Troy, again, thanks so much for your partnership with us and just for the knowledge that you've brought. I love working with Troy because Troy is very matter of fact, and he's really helped us kind of not go too far, but do enough and do the things that we need to do. And just for all of y'all out there, if you really think about what we're talking about, and we'll have time to answer questions. If you have questions, please come find me or Troy after the service. We're happy to answer any of the questions we have. But really, this is more about coordinating a lot of the things that we're already doing. We have point men, we have AEDs, we have fire extinguishers, we have all these things that we've done already. We're really just coordinating this in a way that if something does happen, we've got the people in the place to help whoever it is in our congregation that needs it. So, Troy, thank you. We're really just blessed that we were introduced to you. And for all of you out there, men and women, if you are interested in being a part of this team and to hear a little bit more about what that might look like, please get me your name and we'll start working on some meetings here in the future to kind of move forward. So,
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.